Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to many of you too who are in other time zones. My name's Arj Devadas. We are going to get started with our today's Knowledge Builder webinar, 10 Human Truths from 3,400 plus UX and Research. We have a really great presentation today being presented by Sandstorm Design. As you know, many of you who have participated in these webinars before, we have always brought to the table a lot of our partners who add value to our products and services, but also create some great education for the public. And so we want to bring this through to our webinar series. I just wanted to put a plug in there for ACGI, your host today. ACGI Software, we're based in Columbia, Maryland. We are developers of an association management software system called Association Anywhere, and also a credentialing management software system called Certelligence. That is pretty much all I'm going to say about us, but we certainly would love to hear from you. I'd also like to put a great shout out to our customers. We often get quite a few customers participating in these webinars, so thank you for joining us today. As you might know, today's webinar, and as most of our webinars in the webinar series, you are entitled to earn a CAE credit. But there are some instructions that we are required to make sure that you know about from the ASAE. First of all, at the end, the conclusion of today's webinar, we will bring up a slide and then a polling question. And it's a simple polling question just to attest that you have participated in today's webinar. All you have to do is say yes. I'd also like to put a great shout out to our customers. We often get quite a few customers participating in these webinars, so thank you for joining us today. As you might know, today's webinar, and as most of our webinars in the webinar series, you are entitled to earn a CAE credit. But there are some instructions that we are required to make sure that you know about from the ASAE. First of all, at the end, the conclusion of today's webinar, we will bring up a slide and then a polling question, and it's a simple polling question just to attest that you have participated in today's webinar. All you have to do is say yes, and by saying yes, we will capture that information. We will also send you a certificate so that you have some proof that you participate today. If you have any problems with that, however, we do keep it in our records. So with that, I'd like to today welcome our presenters, James Wynne and Amanda Hedberg. Are you both online with me? I just want to do a sound check here.
Yes, we are.
Excellent, excellent. Well, let me just introduce James. Leads all aspects of user experience at Sandstorm Design, a digital brand experience agency that turns user insights into optimized user experiences through a blend of UX, brand strategy, data, and enterprise-level technology. James has worked for many major e-commerce businesses such as Walgreens, Sprint, Valspar, Orbitz, Patagonia, Capital One, just to name a few. And he's a strong believer in collaboration, prototyping, and above all, creating solutions rooted in data and research. Also, I'd like to introduce from Sandstorm, Amanda Heiberg, the Vice President of Business Development. Amanda has worked with hundreds of associations over her career, guiding teams towards more effectively utilizing technology solutions to meet their organizational, business process, and digital needs. Amanda has over 20 years of business development, sales, marketing, and partnership development in technology solutions. So with that, what I'd like to do is hand over the controls to James and Amanda and give them the floor.
All right. Well, welcome, everybody. Like Arj says, today we're here to walk through 10 human truths from all of our time, and it's more than 3,400 hours now of UX research and usability studies. These are things that we find that come up over and over again, no matter what kind of client we work with, no matter what kind of product we're recreating. So just to let you know who Sandstorm is, I'm going to let Amanda take it over. There you go.
And again, thanks everyone for joining. We want to get into the meat of the presentation today, but for those of you who are not familiar with us, we're a digital agency that works with associations and nonprofits and also other organizations as well. We've been in business for about 20 years, so celebrated that last year. From a technology perspective, we implement lots of complex websites and e-commerce solutions. on a lot of different platforms like Drupal, WordPress, as well as Kentico. We're a deep ACGI partner, which is one of the reasons why we're here today. Been working with them, doing a lot of complex integration, single sign-on work with them for many years. And as an extension of that, we do just a lot of AMS, LMS, community type integration work, journal, career center, those types of things. But to James's point earlier, really what we're going to be digging into and diving into today is all of the breadth of experience we have conducting usability testing, UX and user research with these thousands of hours of experience. We've been doing usability and user research for well over a decade, kind of before it was really a thing, really cool. So again, excited to share some of these perspectives with you today. And with that, I'll hand it off to James.
Okay. All right, so first of all, we're going to start off, before we get into the truth, let's start off with a little note about usability testing. And a lot of people, when you talk about usability testing, a lot of our clients, they start thinking of like a Clockwork Orange, where you get people trapped into a little room and there's one-way mirrors and cameras and electrodes and things like that. The fun fact is it doesn't nearly have to be that complicated. It doesn't nearly have to be that expensive. We have found, and this is a sort of industry fact, you really only need 5 to 6 users to identify 80% of the problems. That is, you can get to a statistical relevancy in a very short amount of time, and with some really, really low-fi methods. So if you look at our general track on usability problems, you'll see that the way we run our protocols is we try to have 6 to 8 participants per user segment. So for example, if you're working in healthcare and you had doctors and patients, you would have 6 to 8 doctors and 6 to 8 patients, and you'd probably do one of those each segment over a day. These are one-to-one, hour-long tests in which we break it up by getting their overall impression of whether it be a web page, a mobile app, a product, get their overall impression, what motivates them, what would precipitate them to use something like this, and then we give them tasks. So we for example, to again use a healthcare example, if it's a consumer or patient, maybe we would run them through a Find the Doctor tool. Or if it was a doctor, maybe we would run them through a Refer a Patient tool. And just kind of watch them and listen to them as they move through these systems, as they try to accomplish tasks. And we judge, we evaluate that completion of task on about 10 usability heuristics, which again are pretty industry standard. And so usability, while it may sound daunting, is really not that hard, and it's really invaluable for what it can reveal to you, and really challenge some of your preconceptions about the users that you're trying to serve. So going deeper into why you would want to conduct usability tasks, one principle, which is also a human truth, is people often use things in ways that you don't expect. So for example, I was working on one client, and I was interviewing their entire staff and discovered that everyone was using Control F because the website couldn't let them find something very quickly. People make up their own little tools and tricks, and the idea is to really find out what those are and leverage them, either to give them that same mechanism or to solve the problem in a better way that they've already solved it themselves. Also, identifying content and functionality. It's a great way to hear from your users. Sometimes, again, they will surprise you, and the thing that you spent most of your time and energy investing in is probably, it might not be the thing that they necessarily find value with. This is a great way to have, to couple up your users with your analytics and see what everybody is using. Obviously, in e-commerce, abandonment and moving through a purchase funnel is a huge, huge concern. So optimizing those flows, and that could be everything from buying a book to downloading a presentation or watching a webinar for CLE credit. Anything where you're trying to get users through a process quickly and efficiently and have them convert. So for a little comparatively low cost, you can get a lot of value. I won't spend the entire time telling war stories, but recently I did a usability test for the government in British Columbia, and it was a serious, it was kind of a serious issue. It was about a tax and people had to figure out on their own whether they owed this tax or they didn't owe the tax. And, you know, taxes being the popular thing that they are, people weren't real happy about doing this in the first place. We ran a usability test that, well, I'll just say it averted clear disaster. Nobody could figure out if they owed the tax. Nobody could figure out if they didn't owe the tax. And they were just generally irritable about the whole thing. So we actually had ministers from the government sitting with us, and they were able to make changes, which ultimately got baked into the system and got the application launched with a lot less press hassle and a lot less pushback than they were expecting. So usability can really be the thing that kind of saves the day for you, again, at a very low cost. I've done usability tests in full labs, again, with two-way mirrors and cameras, but I've also done usability tests in a conference room with just a tape recorder and a video recorder and just somebody sitting there, you know, trying to accomplish a task. It definitely doesn't need to be this thing where you boil the ocean. It's one of those things that you can really get a lot of value out of in a very quick amount of time. So for example, I'll use a couple of client examples just to show you how we do this. As you can see, this is one of our clients that we were doing a test for the National Business Institute, and what they do is they offer continuing education for legal professionals. And you can see down there in the corner, there's our testing subject, and what we wanted to do was have them move through a high fidelity version of the design and watch how they used it. And if you look at this screen, you'll see where we're trying to accommodate two types of users. We're trying to accommodate the ones who are just searchers, who kind of want to just dive in and find the course that they want. And we're also trying to accommodate browsers. So what we want to do is make sure that the hierarchy of that is clear, that people can accomplish whatever task they want to get based on the type of person they are, or based on how they want to accomplish that task. And you can see that we're doing this in kind of a high fidelity prototype, but again, none of this has to work. So it can look and feel to the user like it's live, but we haven't put development in this, so you're saving money. It's the best way to get feedback. The worst way to get feedback is at the end when you've already built the thing and somebody comes to you and says, I can't use this at all. Another example, and this is lower fidelity. So this is an insurance client that we worked for, and they had questions about, okay, we want to make sure that we accomplish the task, but you know, getting insurance on a mobile phone, well, that seems a bit complicated. Let's make sure we can get people through the funnel in a simplistic way where they understand what their choices are, what the implications of those choices are, where they are in the funnel, make sure that everything's been saved, just to give them real confidence that they're using the product correctly. And you can see in here, this has no design. This was wireframes that we turned into an interactive prototype. So you can start doing usability testing. People do usability testing on paper prototypes. You can do them on flat compositions, as you saw in my last example, or you can do them in interactive prototypes where you're not trying to distract the users from imagery and colors. So there's like I said, both with the mechanism of testing where you can either do it from a conference room or you can do it in a full service lab. We actually have a full service lab on site. So, it's nice when we can get people in here and then we can watch them and, you have an observation room and things like that. But we also do on-site testing. Just like that, you can test with anything from a bunch of cards where you're trying to get people to bucket things for navigation to a full-on prototype where you're trying to get people to find something like a continuing education credit or a product or a service and try to get them through the sales funnel. Okay, so that being said about usability testing, let's get into the top 10 things that we've learned from usability testing. And I will say, first off, as you listen to this, this is not just about websites. This is about you can use this whether you're writing an email, whether you're making a presentation, whether you're doing posts on social media. These things retain true because they are human truths. So these are the things that I use every day, even when I'm communicating or trying to show anybody anything. It's not necessarily just for a website. It's really these are really more principles around communication and how people behave today. So the first truth is that users expect everything instantly. I like to say, I especially with my B2B people that I work with, I like, and you'll see this come up in the presentation. I like to say, yeah, your customers are B2B customers, but they live in an Uber world. So just because someone works in large manufacturing or works for an association or works in higher academics, it doesn't mean at the end of the day they're not using Netflix, they're using the CTA tracker, they're using Uber, they're using Plated or Freshly. So they've gotten accustomed to digital experiences that are quick and respond instantly. So we come to our first poll. How long do you wait for a web page to load until you hit refresh? And you just take a few seconds and think about that. And think about, like, when you think about 3 seconds or 5 seconds, almost in your head, sit there and wait for 5 seconds. It's an inordinately long time. One of the things that I often get asked about is people will come to me and say, okay, we spent a whole bunch of money on an ad campaign and we're pushing to this landing page, but we're getting this crazy high bounce rate. And always, the first thing that I'll do is look at page speed performance because people will not stick around. So, I'll come to a landing page and I'll see that the header, the image at the top is 500K. Right, so you're basically spending all this marketing money for people to sit there and then bail on a blank page. That's the first thing I look for, and it's probably the most. It's probably the thing that really affects people's browsing the most.
Are we ready to share this poll? Give you about 5 more seconds, and then we'll close it down. 3, 2, 1. And let's share the results.
All right, 5 seconds. All right, so I would say everybody, not now, because I know it would be very uncomfortable, but later on today, just sit and stare at a screen for 5 seconds. The average back in the early 90s, it used to be 9 seconds. I think now it's about 3 seconds before people bail. People are just getting really, really impatient. Also, as far as usability principles go, like letting users know that something is happening, really engendering that confidence. Like you'll see, this is what meters and things like that are for. So they show like, oh, okay, something's going on, something's not just frozen. I think that's from all of us having to grow up with Microsoft where, sometimes things just froze and you don't know if it's working or not. 50% of people will refresh a page when it takes more than 3 seconds. So if you imagine being on a hold line and then you wait for 2 minutes, and then you get up and you call back, you're basically just doubling your time. And honestly, most people will not stick around. They'll try once, maybe refresh it, and then they'll move on. So time is a huge KPI that we look at. The good news is that most people are not doing a good job of this. The majority of sites out there are running very slow, and these can be simple things to fix. Again, like a header image that's too big, or a bunch of JavaScript files that aren't cached. Google has free tools that you can look, and they will score your page and give you recommendations both on desktop and mobile. So this is something that if you're getting high bounce rates or you're not seeing the performance that you expect, this is the first culprit that I try to look at. And again, the takeaway here is really improving your site is probably one of the biggest things that you can do. So for example, going back to that marketing bounce rate example, so people came to me and it was a landing page for a product, and they said, oh, we're getting a big high bounce rate. We should start changing the copy. And I'm kind of stealing my own thunder, but I'm like, well, let's see how the page is performing first before we start changing the copy. Because all of a sudden, we're going to fix this problem without having to change the content or design at all. Which leads me to my second point. Users do not read. They scan blocks of content. This is true, and remember when I said this is about this is not just a website, this is a PowerPoint presentation that you're making, this is an email that you're sending, this is a social media post that you're making. This is something that's supported by research. It's even changing the way that people act naturally with reading books. It's just over the years, digital has trained people. Some people call it the PowerPoint effect. But really, people scan for headlines, for bullet lists, for infographics. People do not read big copy walls. So if you look at the way that content has adapted to this, you'll see that, we've got a big photo, we've got a catchy headline, there's a subhead. So basically, in that first three elements, I've really gotten the gist of what you're trying to communicate. And then I've moved the social buttons up top, and I'll talk about why that's done. But you see, as a matter of principle, you always want to break up copy with headlines, with sub-bullets, pull quotes, infographics. These are the things that people really respond to and get the point across. Obviously, you've all, I don't know if you read BuzzFeed, but they kind of pioneered the listicle. People love listicles, top 10 things, top 4 things. This is something we also find when we do user research is people, they like that kind of content because even the headline implies that it's consumable. Oh, there's just a list of 10 things they want me to read. That actually also, and we're talking about those social share buttons, people will share content even when they don't read it. And we're going to come up with another poll question here. This is sometimes people find this surprising, but the data really supports it. People will, despite having not read something, they will share it to their social network. Sometimes they'll just read the headline and the subhead, and if it proves their point or if it's something that they want to communicate, they'll send it along. So just take a quick poll. Who is guilty of doing this?
Got about 70% of the audience. We'll just wait about another 5 seconds, 83%. 4, 3, 2, 1. We'll close the poll down now. And let me share this with everyone, James.
Excellent. All right. So everybody's honest, which is good. I am also, and I'll go back. Arj, I'll keep going. So if you look at the data, this is really sort of indicting, I guess, for us as a culture. The less time users spend reading, the more likely they are to share it. And content publishers actually, they know this. I mean, I've been doing this for 25 years, and the other day I saw the Cubs traded Chris Bryant, and I'm like, oh, I'm going to share that, and that's not actually true. So yes, anybody can be fooled, and I have done it myself, and then you end up embarrassed because people on your social networks will tell you that, you know, you just got pulled in. What type of content gets shared? Again, you can see the majority lists and infographics. So we found that infographics are very popular. They're consumable. They are often engaging from a design perspective because designers like to work with different typography. They're usually visually strong. They communicate a point across without having to provide a lot of text. So when we're looking up ways to break up content, again, pull quotes, headlines, subheads, infographics, these are all great content types and really encourage you getting your messaging out there. So if you were to think about this and take away from this, I would say that just like with SEO, you know, maybe you spend more time on your headline and your subhead and your imagery, and then allow people to share up front than sort of the last paragraph in a 1,500 word post, because unfortunately people are probably not going to get there. Okay, another human truth is users value consistency. This is something that I like to call the rental car problem. So if you look at, for example, let's juxtapose web browsers with rental cars. Two very, very different products, but they kind of show off a principle. So web browsers, you have your back button, you have your forward button, you have your home button, you have your bookmarks. Web browsers, while they promise different speeds and maybe the one has a different way of doing something a little different than the other, they're pretty much uniform in their design. Rental cars, however, and this is the big, I'm letting you guys in on some inside baseball here. This is the rift between user experience designers and industrial designers, because industrial designers and car designers want to make everything a beautiful snowflake, which leads to the problem of people sitting in rental car parking lots trying to figure out how the gear works, or trying to figure out how to turn the headlights on, or trying to figure out how to turn on the left turn signal. People learn how to use systems, and sometimes those systems aren't even the best ones. They're just the ones that got out there first and got out there the most. So for example, you could say that the way that Amazon runs their filtering search, well, maybe you could come up with a better one, but Amazon has such a big footprint that that's the way people are used to accomplishing that task. So people really prefer when you use paradigms or models that they're familiar with. Here's an example from a client where we wanted to use, we wanted to have users sort of narrow down journal articles, so we gave them some icons to do those things. So, for example, a heart icon was supposed to add this to your interest list. The thumbs up was supposed to say, show me more like this. The thumbs down was supposed to say, okay, this is not close to what I wanted. And if you think about like a Spotify or a Pandora, it makes a lot of sense for them. But in the model that these professionals, these medical professionals were using, it didn't make sense to them because you don't thumbs down somebody's research. Obviously, the heart icon has a whole bunch of different connotations. So this is an instance where we used iconography and we tested iconography, and it didn't pan out. And that's super helpful because making users learn an entirely new system of iconography always has mixed success. Iconography is great when especially when you're using, doing multiple languages, and trying to save real estate. But understand that icon metaphors are sort of embedded, and they mean a certain thing. And if you try to change that meaning to a user, it will lead to frustration. So when looking at systems and the way to accomplish tasks, look at what the dominant models or the dominant paradigms are out there, and you can kind of see everybody pick up the same styles as they are successful. This is going to make some people very unhappy, but unfortunately, it's the truth. Users do see those rotating banner ads or rotating banner images and copy. They largely see them as an ad. It leads to something the industry calls banner blindness, where users are just skipping past that. These carousels, they're problematic. A lot of sort of administrators like them because they're able to satisfy multiple product groups or multiple content owners. They give a dominant visual image. They allow you to put more offers out there. The problem is that people ignore them. They add more noise to a page that not necessarily you don't want users trying to figure out how to work this carousel. You want them paying attention to your content. Also, they're a usability nightmare, or accessibility nightmare from Americans with Disabilities Act, and they give fits to screen readers for what's being focused. And then finally, as you'll see in this example, only 25% of your content is being shown at one time. So those three other things are hidden, and the user will probably never see them. A better thing to do would be to have some kind of static thing, and then those other three things could be placed around the homepage so that they get the exposure that you want them to have. We say prioritize or personalize. So either if you're going to use a dominant element like that, make sure it's valuable. A lot of times you're seeing sites put a search bar right in the middle of that hero area. You saw that with my example for NBI. Or simple personalization. You don't necessarily need a huge system. Maybe it's cookied or something like that. But really try to, if you're going to use that space, make it valuable and customize it to the user. A good myth that we always run into is a question we get asked a lot. Will people scroll? And what about the fold? Research has shown that 92% of people will scroll. As mobile has become more prevalent as a user interaction, people are just more and more used to scrolling. It is the most common user activity. The big thing you need to worry about is something we call a false floor. So when you look at, for example, Radio Flyer, you're looking at, this is their website, and what you don't see is all the content that they've got underneath this carousel here. Whereas in the next page, you can see your eye being led down the page. So this is what we call, well, in a very scientific term, a peekaboo. So what we try to do is we try to give the user a visual indicator that there is something down the page. So don't be afraid of scrolling, just be afraid of false floors. Just give the user a visual indicator that things are there's more to see, and they will scroll. And that number, research shows that 92% of people will scroll. When provided a visual indicator to scroll, that number goes up to 100%. People ask us about the fold. For those of you not familiar, that is a term that comes from the old newspaper days when newspapers were in boxes and you only got to show the content that was above the fold to get somebody to buy the paper. Nowadays, the fold is usually where the content is. So, for example, I don't know if anybody has looked into a subscription service like Blue Apron or BarkBox, or even back in the day, new business models like Airbnb or Uber even. A lot of times what you'll have is there's a design now where you've got this sort of beautiful image with a CTA. It says start exploring, and then right under that there's a how it works. They put this most important content right at the fold level, and people are looking for it, and you can see that they have that content and they're keeping it very consumable and bite-sized, but they're putting it at the place where most people are going to look. Content below the fold is not a problem. You can put valuable content there. People will see it. You just have to give them an indication that it's there. Again, false bottoms or false floors are where the users, if there's nothing to indicate that there's anything below that. This actually just happened to me yesterday. I was looking at freshly.com, and they've got a lead gen form on their site, and there's nothing below it, or so it would seem. And you get to the site and you're thinking, oh, well, I don't want to fill out a lead gen form. I just want to know more. So you bounce. But if you scroll, they actually give you all the content that you were looking for. You just need to know to scroll. Also, so for 7, this is more of a technical one, but I think it's something that's going to be even more important. Especially, it's already key for industries like healthcare and finance and government. Is thinking about accessibility and thinking about users that necessarily may be low vision or may be on their keyboards or maybe need a screen reader. And this, again, like usability testing, this is something that can easily be tested for and easily be corrected. So here's an example of a client that we had where users were asked to select. They went through this tool and they were looking to see what kind of siding that they would put on their house. And one of the first tasks they had was to choose a color. Well, you see, moving across, and you see the ones we've identified. Arctic white is a particular favorite. That's type on top of a color, and there are contrast checkers out there that are tied into rules from the ADA, and that fails. Now, if you go to contrastchecker.com, for example, you can check those, and all you need to do is, and it'll help you change that color just a little bit. Sometimes it's not even noticeable to the naked eye, but it will be compliant with colors of letters and backgrounds for that particular type size. So that's something that always be cognizant of, and it's not just colors; it's imagery. So a lot of people, again, in those big homepage rotating banners, a lot of people will put type on top of imagery, and sometimes if you don't know the image that's going to be there, you can cause yourself an accessibility problem.
And just to add to that too, James, if you go back, this is a large manufacturer outside of the association space, clearly. But if you can think about the amount of money that was invested in this application, the amount of marketing dollars that's invested in pushing people to select their siding color and then they're getting it wrong, right? So just sort of think about that in the context of your own organization. You know, things that, again, that folks have great ideas for that are failing at a very simplistic level, right? So, you know, again, you know, we're sort of not all alone here, you know, with sort of looking at accessibility and where things are failing, in particular where we're spending lots of money from a development standpoint. But the good of this is that these are very easily correctable things. And one of the really strong reasons to do things like usability testing and accessibility testing as well.
Yep. And as I mentioned, there are contrast checkers all over the internet. They all pretty much work the same way. They ask you for the foreground, they ask you for the background, and then they give you the guidelines for what passes the standard and what doesn't. So this is something, and again, this is a 10-minute fix. This is like Amanda said, this is low-hanging fruit to really help you get the most out of your investment. And yeah, sometimes color, that may be the only thing. If people can't see, if the fonts are too small or there's not enough contrast, people will bail. Number 8, this happens a lot where you've got strong product-driven organizations or organizations that have strong voices that are fighting for their particular needs and wants, which is great. The issue sometimes you run into is that users actually have their own goals and they have their own things that they're trying to accomplish. And you can't fool the user. That is unfortunately one of the things. That's another, we'll call that truth 11. No matter what you do with copy, no matter what you do with a weird flow or asking if they're really, really sure they don't want to subscribe to something, unfortunately it really doesn't work. Here's an example of a test we did about a month ago actually for an air purifier client. So this is a consumer product client, and if you look at their family of air purifiers, first they arranged them in a left to right tier system that our users assumed was based on cost. It is not. It is based on what they want you to buy most. Also, users thought that the names somehow implied cost or didn't understand what the names meant. Also, if you look at the language, it doesn't really give the difference between the different product lines. So what we ran into is a test where users were trying to find the right product for them using a website where the internal communications team wanted all the products to not have any negative or not have any sort of juxtaposition. And it ends up just confusing and frustrating users. And so they end up abandoning. The biggest thing that came out of this test was, again, in finding requirements, is the users were desperate for a comparison chart. A simple comparison chart that would take our client, 20 minutes or half a day to come up with. Nothing technologically fancy. They just wanted to see it in a one-stop shop. And again, it's that Best Buy, it's that sort of Consumer Reports Best Buy comparison mentality that this client just has to adapt to. So again, like we always advise, transparency builds trust. Trying to fool users doesn't work. All you end up doing is buying yourself headaches. I had another instance where I ran into this theater that serve alcohol with the movie, and they were defaulting their ticket prices to, you're buying a ticket and you're getting a beer, because they wanted to sell they wanted to sell a beer, have that ticket value go up. Problem is, everybody kept using the default sort and getting a beer they probably didn't want. The theater's solution for that was to add copy, to say, oh, if you don't want this beer, then don't choose the beer. And remember what we said, nobody reads. So solving problems with copy is almost never going to work. really use the dominant path, or we call it the golden path. People just want a ticket. If you want to sell them a beer, absolutely have that, but don't try to fool people and upsell them in their cart, because it's not going to work, and all you're going to do is end up with frustration and a lot of customer service calls or calls to your organization to fix what they did by accident. Okay, number 9, users recognize stock photography. It's something that automatically sort of, it takes away from your credibility. I don't know if you want to talk about the American Planning Association, but this is an example where people, when they look at stock photography, again, like those hero images, it just often leads to what we call banner blindness. They just move over and move across. They move across the imagery and whatever you're trying to tell them. Sometimes they'll assume it's a content syndicated ad and just completely ignore it.
Well, some of this too is that, there are times and places for stock photography. We all need to use stock photography for obvious reasons. But when it comes down to authentic places like membership, like the About Us, people want to see images of themselves, of real humans, of their colleagues and their peers. So this was a really easy sort of tweak that we were able to make with the APA to make sure that those sections really reflected their membership and their community, rather than, again, using those stock photography images. And also, too, we work with a lot of healthcare and medical associations, lots of doctors with white coats and stethoscopes, that are stock photography, really sort of, again, are off-putting to, to those physicians, to those surgeons, to those members. So keeping it authentic in the places where it should is really important, and certainly for the credibility and the overall experience within the organization.
And I think Amanda summed that up perfectly. Okay, and then finally, and this kind of goes back to what I said before, is we're all kind of living in an Uber world. A great example of this is the industry, finance and healthcare, where you've got these sort of giant legacy systems that have huge regulatory responsibilities and lots of IT and security responsibilities. And they're really struggling to keep up with disruptors that will say, quote unquote, are born digital. So for example, Chase, right? Chase comes out with a deposit your check by your mobile phone. All of a sudden that becomes table stakes and everybody's expected to have that. Healthcare, there are urgent care that comes out with same day appointments, or I can see what the wait is when I walk in. All of a sudden, users are expecting, or consumers are expecting healthcare providers to have that functionality, because that's the world that everybody lives in. Just because you're a hospital, just because you're a bank, just because you're an association, users don't drop that expectation. They still expect functionality that they've seen other places, and it might not even be in that same space. They've just grown up, or sort of they've come to have that expectation that technology can do this. I've seen it done before. Why can't you guys do it? So, for example, here's another way in which we've used things that people are used to and dominant interaction models. So, for example, here's Wayfair shopping for chandeliers, and you see they allow a user to filter by different product attributes. Well, if somebody's used to using that, well, they can use that for the same thing, finding a completely different product, so one is furniture, the other is education materials, but the paradigm remains the same. And when I have multiple filters when I'm looking for a chandelier, why can't I have multiple filters when I'm looking for a webinar, or I'm looking for a book, or I'm looking for a white paper? So you see where we have this, we use these paradigms, no matter whether it's in our industry or whether it's a B2B thing. I think a great example is the Domino's pizza tracker, We actually were working, that insurance client we did usability tests for, we were actually working on, okay, how do we show users the status of their claim? Well, who does this really well? Domino's. Domino's does it really well. Completely unrelated industry, but if we look up and out and we look at, well, who has a really great way of showing status in a really, really simple way that shows you where you are in the process, shows you all the steps in the process, gives you confidence that something has happened, and personalizes it a little bit so there's real people behind it. This is some inspiration that we took. So you can find inspiration outside your own space. You can find criteria outside your own space as far as like a level of expectation. So for example, like if you're going to ask your users to print out a PDF, type in or write in their response, and then fax it into you, nobody's going to do that because people stopped doing that 20 years ago. So again, there are solutions everywhere. People have, for the most part, adopted to those solutions. I think between Amazon, Google, Apple, and Microsoft, most paradigms have been established. And new ones are fun when they get invented, but inventing a new paradigm or new model just to invent it is something that we really don't recommend, because teaching people how to use your website is not what you put it there for. You put it so that they can get your content and your services. And remember, you're absolutely unique, just like everyone else. 6 to 8 people will pretty much gives you 80% of the problems. And people are more alike than they are different, which makes usability and user experience research really invaluable and saves you lots and lots of time and lots of heartache. I think there's lots of stories in the news where people, they designed a voting ballot wrong, or a website went down, or nobody understood how to do this. I think Audi or BMW just got in trouble with the way that people were switching gears, in that it was throwing cars into reverse because of the way that people were using it, because they came up with a completely new way of switching gears. Again, those car designers giving us fits. But that little bit of testing can save an enormous amount of time and an enormous amount of cost. Okay, now I think we're good on time. I will open up for questions.
Excellent. And that was a great presentation, James and Amanda. Really interesting. I know a lot of folks on our end are watching it right now too. We did get a couple questions. First of all, let me jump right in. There's a question that came in, says, and I'm not exactly sure in what context some of these are, but we'll try to figure that out. Does being on mobile affect any of these? I guess they're talking about the different truths.
Yep. And I will say it does, to the point where every one of them is doubled. If you think about people don't read, people definitely don't read on mobile. If you think about people scrolling is more natural on mobile. If you think about contrast and color contrast, think about glare. If you think about people aren't going to wait for 3 to 5, 7 seconds, well, imagine going from broadband to LTE to 4G. So those mobile devices and limiting that bandwidth. I think each one of these, you could make a case, is intensified when you get into a smaller screen size or a mobile environment.
And we got another question. This one is, actually, I think you struck a nerve with the carousel one, because we got 2 questions that just came in. Well, I got to tell you, there's things, they annoy me, but I'm just afraid to speak up, So anyway, the first question is, what are some good examples of not having a rotating banner on a homepage? What are some good examples?
Yes. So, for example, there are a lot of people now are using video to convey movement and to convey brand. It also, with video, you're not asking users to do anything, so you can show a lot of different product types or a lot of different content. Also, it makes you look sort of technologically advanced. I think personalized hero areas, again, and that's something, again, can be done very simply. You can do that with cookies, just a little bit of information you need from the user. And then also, you could look at analytics and say, like, okay, for a certain time of year, we're going to run this. So being cognizant of when your users are using your site. So, for example, you may not know this, but the middle of March is the corned beef is searched more than anything else. So if you're on allrecipes.com and they have a hero area, I would probably have a promo for corned beef recipes there. So just being smart about guessing your user intention, and then once you have their sort of explicit intention, and you can capture that by cookies, being very transparent to them, just doing a better job of personalizing that content rather than asking them to scroll through a bunch of panels or having them auto-rotate, which just causes a bunch of noise and accessibility problems.
So now we're getting a couple questions, but we're running out of time, and I do need to leave 1 minute to get that CAE question up. But I will ask this one because it's so interesting. What are some good ways to make sure users scroll? I know you talked a little bit about that, especially that peaking of being able to scroll down the page. Anything quickly?
A lot of times what you'll see is just a little arrow under the hero area. So some people animate it, some people don't. It can be done without making it look like a used car lot. Also, if you want to be a little bit more elegant, typing up that space between the first and second level of content, or the first and second groups. We have found that large color fields that stop all of a sudden, you have to be really careful with those. So if you remember, that radio flyer, I think was on white, but if you look at a lot of websites, they'll have that image, or they'll have a top color field, and then there's just a hard stop. And they can do that with interrupters and things like that. It doesn't necessarily have to be the top image on the page, but anytime you kind of have a hard line, a hard horizontal line on your site, you just want to make sure that you're giving some indication. If there's content below there, so you could either have, some people do scroll down, some people do an arrow, some people do just making sure the headline, the top of the headline on the next section is visible. So just little visual cues like that.
That's great. So we are out of time, but I do need to share that polling question. I just want to thank James and Amanda. Thank you so much for presenting today and bringing so much of your knowledge to the Knowledge Webinar Series. And thank you, Sandstorm Designs, for volunteering your times today. If you have any questions at all, we did get a couple questions we were not able to get to, but please feel free to send those questions to James and Amanda. And there will be a follow-up email. They may send an email out also just to follow up with you. Feel free to connect with them and find out more about their services. With that, I'd like to thank everyone for joining us today for today's Knowledge Webinar Series. I did not get to talk a little bit about some that are upcoming, but we are going to be back on schedule in March and April and May with a webinar each one of those months. So we will send you some more information. If you've subscribed to any of our communication, you should get an email from that. But again, I'd like to thank you all today, and I hope you have a great afternoon. Happy New Year, too. Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thanks, Sarge.